Hey, what's up beat hackers? In this week's video, I want to go all the way back to basics and teach you how to DJ if this is your first time behind DJ decks. So I've broken the video down into two parts. The first part is me just teaching you everything you need to know about your DJ decks that you probably don't know. And then the second part, I'm going to teach you how to do your first transition. It's called a beat match. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay guys, so let's just get straight into this. Now I'm going to assume that you've got some DJ decks and you've already learned how to plug them all in, but I'm just going to quickly cover some extremely basic stuff, which is generally the controls at the back of your DJ deck will allow you to plug your DJ deck into speakers so your audience can hear the music you're playing. And at the front, you'll see a headphone jack at the front of your DJ decks, which if you plug in, you'll be able to listen to the music, but only you will be able to hear it, which I'm going to come into in a bit more detail in a bit. Also, at the back of your DJ decks, you're going to be able to connect your DJ decks to your computer via a USB. The reason for this is because these are not necessarily DJ decks, they're actually just DJ controllers. And by the way, this applies to whatever DJ controller you have and whatever software you are using, okay? So, this controller here is only really controlling stuff that's going on my computer program. For example, if I put my hand on this wheel here and move it, you will see my computer screen moving over here. If I was to unplug these DJ decks, they would do nothing by themselves. So that's the first kind of thing you need to understand. Now, the next thing I want to do is quickly just run you through some critical settings that you need to know about on these DJ decks. Now, I know you're looking at them thinking they look really complicated and there's just knobs and switches and buttons everywhere, but I'm going to instantly make this half as easy or half as difficult for you to understand, which is this side of the DJ decks is identical to this side of the DJ decks. So you now only have to learn half of the stuff on the DJ decks. So here's the absolute basics of DJing. All you need to be able to do is have one track playing here on track A and blend in track B that's playing over here and then just go back and forth. If you can do that for a prolonged period of time, you can perform a DJ set and you can have any audience of people rocking. So let's go into the actual controls on these DJ decks here, and I'm going to start at the absolute basics and then move through to slightly harder things, but it's all critical stuff you need to know. So the first thing you need to know is where the play and pause button is, which is down here. It's going to be in the same place on all DJ decks. And by the way, just to stress, if your DJ decks look different to this, don't worry, everything I'm going to be covering in this video you will have the same settings on your DJ deck as what I explain here. So, first thing, play and pause is down here. Pretty straightforward, you just press play and pause. If you press play and pause and you didn't hear anything, it takes me on to my second most important setting of the DJ decks, which is the volume fader. Now, at this point, I wanted to tell you something else. Right now, you can see 4 sets of lanes here with 4 different controllers. Well, there's a middle one as well, which is just a master, but it's just 4 sets here. Now, your DJ decks might just have 2. Well, don't worry. All I'm going to be doing in this video is explaining about the 2. So on this DJ decks, I'm just using these 2 strips here. So don't worry about any of these settings here or here for now, okay? So far we know where the play and pause button is and we know where the volume button is. Those are the 2 most important settings. The next thing you need to know if you are DJing is you might not always want to bring in the track right at the beginning of the song. You may want to go in a little bit of the song and play it from a different point. Which brings me on to the next point, which is cue points. So, for example, if I decided I didn't want to play this song from the beginning and I wanted to go in a bar here and start playing it from here, I can set a cue point by hitting this button here. Now, once I've hit that cue point, I can hit that cue point again and the song will play from that cue point, and as soon as I take my finger off the cue button, it will snap back to where the cue point is. Now, the next point it brings me on to is hot cues. Hot cues are basically the same as a cue point, but with one big difference. The hot cues are based on your DJ decks here, and you'll need to make sure you've got hot cue selected. Now, I can do the exact same thing with a hot cue. Just press this button as long as there's no colors there, and it will activate a hot cue on this point, which again will do the same thing as the cue button. But with one big difference. With the Q button here, if I accidentally go off my mark and hit the Q button again, I've now set a brand new cue point that may not have been at the point that I wanted the cue point to be. No, I wanted it back here. Now, the beauty of a hot cue is wherever you are on the track, if you hit that hot cue, it will snap back to exactly where you set that hot cue. And the even better thing about hot cues is they are saved on your DJ program here. So if you decide that was a great part to start that individual track, and then you load in a different track into your deck, when you go and drag this track back in at a later point, that hot cue will still be there. Now, the next thing I wanted to tell you, which is extremely basic here, which is if you want to load a track into track A or track B, all you literally have to do is drag it like this into track A or into track B like that, and it will literally just load them in exactly as you want. So at this point, we know the play, cue button, and volume. Now, all these other settings moving forward are going to help you with your actual transitions. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is the actual jog wheel here. Now, as we all know from watching other DJs, if you put your hand on top of the jog wheel and move it up and down, you can basically scratch. But something you probably didn't know is there's two parts of the jog wheel that you can touch. The top bit, which you can touch and it will literally stop the track playing. But there's the side bit of your track here, which you can touch and spin. And if you look on my screen, you'll see that it moves the track really, really gradually forward or back. Now you might be thinking, well, what's the point of that? Well, the point of this is when you go to do your first beat match, which is essentially going to be having two beats of a track playing at the same time, you may hit the play button slightly late, and you can use the outside of your deck to allow you to catch up or align the two beats perfectly. Okay, so that's the jog wheel. The next thing you need to know about is the tempo slider here. So with DJing, not all songs are the same speed. And what I mean by speed is beats per minute. That's how it's judged. That's how the speed of a track is judged in DJing. How many beats are there in this minute? A faster track would be like 140 beats per minute, and a slower track could be 90 beats per minute. Now, what's going to happen when you're DJing is you're quite often going to be playing similar genre of music that will have a similar BPM, but they won't all be perfect. So sometimes you'll have a track that's 124 and a track that's 128. So if you to look at my screen now, one track could be 124 here and another track could be 128. Well, in order to do a perfect transition, you need to make sure that the two tracks are exactly the same speed. So this is where the tempo slider comes in. You can move it up or down to align the two speeds. So you can make the one track 128 like this, or you can make the other track 124. Now my top tip here is, as you'll see, there's a smaller decimal place here. Always make sure that those two are identical as well. So don't make sure that one is in 124.1 or 0.3. Make sure they are absolutely identical, because then they will run in line perfectly at all points. Okay, so we've now covered the jog wheel and the tempo. The next thing I want to talk to you about is headphones. So something that's really critical to DJs is to be able to hear the next track that they're thinking about playing while their audience are currently dancing to the song that is playing. So for example, on track B, you've got this volume all the way up. The audience are dancing to track B. But I want to listen to track A. So I've loaded a track in, and the secret is all you've got to do is hit this cue button here, which will allow me to hear the track that's currently playing even though my audience can't hear it. So if I was to hold my headphones up to the microphone, you'll hear the volume come out. But it's not coming out of the speakers. So that's a really awesome thing that took me so long to work out when I first started DJing. Finally, I want to come on to this mixing panel here. So what you've got here is different filters that will filter out different frequencies. In a moment, I'm going to be teaching you guys how to blend one track to the next. Well, so blending, we usually think of things like food, right? But with music, how do you blend? Well, you can take away certain parts of the music, and that's where this EQ or these frequency knobs come in. So the first thing you need to know about is the bottom one that simply says filter. If I was to turn this to the left, it filters out all of the high frequencies, and if I turn it to the right, it filters out all of the low frequencies. Simple enough to know this. If I was to ask you to speak in a high-pitched voice, you go, "Hi, my name's Phil." If I said speak in a low-pitched voice, you go, "Hi, my name's Phil." So, turn to the left, it gets rid of all the highs. Let's have a quick listen. Kind of sounds like you're standing outside a nightclub, doesn't it? And you turn to the right, you'll hear all the lows go, so you'll just hear the hi-hats and the tinny kind of sounds. Then, these three knobs here basically will do a very similar thing to what this one knob does. These three knobs here, the highs, mids and lows. Now, these are just more detailed controls of what's happening when I'd use the filter knob at the bottom. The lows will get rid of all of the low frequencies, which would be things like the bass line or the drum. The mids would get rid of the mid frequencies, which is typically things like pianos or synthesizers or vocals. And then the highs, if I turn the highs down, it would get rid of all the high frequencies, which would be things like the hi-hats or the white noise, like the kind of. So let's have a quick listen. If I turn away the lows, notice the drum turns down. Same with the mids, you'll hear things like the synths turn down. And then the highs will turn down the hi-hats. Another way of looking at this is if I was to filter to the left and filter out the highs, all I'm essentially doing is the same as turning down the highs and the mids, like this. Let's have a quick listen. And if I was to filter up, getting rid of the bass, it's the same as removing the lows and some of the mids. The only other knob that you're probably looking at here wondering what it is the trim button. This is only used to turn down the volume of a track if it's clipping or going into the red. So if you see a track and it looks like it's doing this, you want to just turn it down until it no longer goes into the red, just like that, just to avoid damaging speakers and stuff like that. So the final thing which I wanted to talk about is the crossfader down here. So the crossfader essentially blends the volume from track A to track B. If it's all the way over on to the left, it's just playing track A. If it's all the way to the right, it's just playing track B. And in the middle, it basically blends the two volumes. So it'd be like doing this, perfectly swapping the two volumes at the same time. Now, the reason I haven't really talked about it is because I always say to my students, just deactivate it and don't use it. I would never really use my crossfader at all. The reason is because there's lots of times where I want the two volume levels playing at a relatively high level over the top of each other. I would never do a blend where I just perfectly move the volumes at the same time past each other. I always like to have a lot more control over exactly how much volume each track is playing. So I just completely deactivate it. If I wanted to activate it, I would just have this to track A and this to track B, and it would allow my crossfader to work. But I just have it in the middle. Alternatively, if you don't really have controls like this, just leave it in the middle at all times. So guys, at this point, you know all the most important settings on your DJ decks, and all the settings I've covered would be available on any of the DJ decks you own. So at this point, I want to move on to helping you guys do your first transition. And the transition we're going to do is called a beat match. Now, as you know, all tracks come with a beat that just runs throughout the entire song. And with a beat match, what you want to do is get the two beats layered at the same time, which will allow you to move from track A to track B while the beat is still going. Most of your audience will always be dancing to the actual beat of a track. So if you keep that beat going between the two tracks and just blend from one track into the next, your audience are constantly grooving, which is really important for a DJ to be able to do that. Because if you just press stop on track A and then came over and press start on track B, it's jarring for your audience. So DJs like to keep the energy going at all points, which is why beat matching is one of the most essential skills of a DJ. Okay, so with that being said, I'm now going to teach you how to do your first ever beat match. So the ingredients that you're going to need is a track that's got a really strong intro beat and a really strong outro beat. So go and find a song that starts with a strong beat like this, And if you were to come onto the wave file and scroll all the way to the end down here, you'll see that it's also got a beat all the way up to the end of the track. Now, the next thing you might want to do is go and find another track that also has the same thing, a strong beat at the beginning and a strong beat at the end, and make sure they're the same speeds. But remember, if one of the tracks is slightly faster than the other, you can just use your tempo slider. However, what I'm going to get you to do here is something slightly controversial. I'm going to get you to drag in two tracks that are exactly the same. So you're going to have the same track on both sides. And we're going to beat match from one track into another, but they're the same track. So the first thing you need to do is go right to the beginning of track A, and from this point on we're going to call this track A and this track B. We're going to go right to the beginning, and you see this white marker right in the middle of your screen here. We're going to make sure that's lined up perfectly with the first beat of the first bar, and we're going to set a cue point. You can either use your cue point here or you can use a hot cue. It's completely up to you. Now, just so you guys know, when I'm talking about beats and bars, a beat would be the drum, boom, boom, boom. That's a beat, and a bar would be every 4 of those. So every 4 beats is a new bar. In fact, if you come and look at Serato here, or this will be the same on your DJ program as well, every 4 beats there's a white line, a thicker white line with a number at the top here. In a moment when we do our first beat match, we want to make sure that we're not just aligning the beats, but we're also aligning the bars. So the next thing I'm going to do is going to get you to go to the end of the track on track B, and we're going to count back 16 bars from the last bar. So we're going to go to here, and we're going to count back 16 bars. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 to here. And we're going to put a cue point 16 bars in before the end of the track just by hitting this button here. And you'll notice it puts a cue point on both because they're the same track. Now, the reason we've gone 16 bars in from the end of the song is because that's typically how long the outro drums will be. And we want them both to line up perfectly. Okay, so we've now got everything set in place for you to do your first beat match. We've got a hot cue set right at the beginning of track A, and we've got a hot cue set at the beginning of the outro drums of track B. So, what we're going to do is we're going to go to track B, get it to that exact point, and bring it back a couple of bars. Now, in a moment, we're going to press play on track B, and you're going to see it scrolling along. Now, you want to press play on track A just as that purple marker that we just set, or the hot cue that we just set, passes over that white line there, okay? So we're going to bring it back a couple of bars, going to bring the volume all the way up. We're going to make sure that the two tracks are the exact same speed, which they are because they're the same track, and we're going to bring the volume all the way up on track A. Now I'm going to press play on track B, and what I'm going to do is just tap along in this little space between any of the buttons here to track B. Just tap along right next to the play button. Keep your eye on the screen, and as soon as that purple cue point passes, press play on track A. Let's give it a quick go now. And remember guys, at this point, if you've got them slightly out and they're not perfectly lined up, you can use the outer ring of your jog wheel to just perfectly align the two so they are absolutely perfectly lined up. At that point, you should have done your first ever beat match, and it should sound really perfect. Because we counted 16 bars back, if you just let that play, the two tracks would bleed perfectly into each other. But as we know, that's not what DJs always do. They do a bit more blending. So I'm going to give you another exercise now where I'm going to teach you how to start blending two tracks together. And this time we're going to need our headphones. Now, something you'll see a lot of DJs do is they'll have one headphone on and one headphone off. That's because it allows them to listen to the song that's currently playing and also listen to the song that's currently in their ear. So what we're going to do is the exact same thing, exact same setup. Bring it back a couple of bars like this and bring this track all the way up. And this time we're going to bring the volume down to about halfway, a little under halfway. And what we're going to do now is press the cue point so we can hear it in our ears, and we're going to tap along using that first cue point or cue button here so we can hear the two in our ear. When we're ready to go, we're going to just hold that button all the way down, and then press play with our thumbs. So we're going to tap along with the cue point, then when we see that purple marker pass, hold it down and press play with our thumb, and then you can take both hands off and it will continue to run. Now, then we're going to do a bit of a blend. So we're going to slowly bring the volume up, and when we begin to hear track A coming in full volume, we then begin to slowly take away the volume of track B. So let's give that a quick go now. And as you guys would have seen, that is the exact reason why I don't like the crossfader. You'll see that I didn't just do this, I actually brought this one really high before I even began to take this one away. Now finally I want to teach you really quickly how to do a very basic blend using your frequency knobs up here. So we're going to do the exact same thing we just did then, but this time we're going to take away the lows, the mids and the highs, and we're going to bring them all to the 9 o'clock position. Then what we're going to do is the exact same thing we just did then, but as we bring the volume up and you're beginning to hear track A, we're going to start to introduce these frequencies. We're going to start with the highs, then the mids, then the lows. Now, in the same way with volume, I had to bring the volume pretty high before I began to hear the track. It works the same with the frequency knobs. So you're going to have to bring the highs really high to about the 11 o'clock position before you can even begin to start taking away the highs of this track. You want to make sure you can really hear the highs of track A before you take them away on track B. So you're going to bring it up to about 11 and begin to take away the highs. Then we're going to do the same with the mids. We're going to bring it up to about the 11 o'clock and then begin to take this track B down to about the 9 o'clock, and then the same thing with the lows. And then when it's done, we're going to begin to just take these away more and more and remove the volume. And you will have done your first very basic blend of frequencies and beat match. So let's give this a really quick go now. So there you go guys, in this video I've taught you the absolute basics of DJing and taught you how to do your very first beat match. Now obviously this is the absolute tip of the iceberg when it comes to DJing, and there's so much more to it than this. So if you want to learn how to do a perfect DJ set every single time, make sure you go and check out my website at beginnerdjlessons.com, where I've got 3 courses that'll teach you how to put on an incredible DJ set every single time, quickly and easily, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you get good at DJing. Finally, I just want to say, if you like this video, leave a comment below, like the video, share it with your friends, and of course, as per usual, if you want to see more videos just like this, subscribe to this channel by hitting this button here and hit the bell notification so you get told about future videos. Hit that button down there if you want to go and see some free beginner DJ training right now. And finally, hit this button below if you want to see a video on teaching you how to blend between different BPMs of music. See you guys in next week's video. Ciao!